Okay, Steve, so thanks for joining me. This is another MLA interview. First of all, congratulations for reaching Challenger.
Thank you, thank you.
I don't even know where to start, man. You've been in the MLA since the 25th of February, 2021. I,
Nearly a full year,
yeah,
or a
no,
little
it's
over a
over.
full
It's
year.
over a year.
Yeah,
I think how many sessions do you think we've done together? I would at least, because you were doing one a week for ages, right?
yeah. Like at the beginning,
I would say at least
like
between.
in the 30s, 40s.
I would say ball and fit because there were some days we would go over multiple VODs. Remember,
Yeah,
we'd
yeah.
go over multiple VODs. So I would say at least 50,
hmm
50 reviews. Is
Probably
that?
ballpark.
And so you've just reached Challenger. You in 2020 you were D2 peak. 2021, you were. I mean, we basically started from scratch, didn't we?
Yeah, I think I had fallen back to D4, and I was in the trenches.
Yes, he came to me, so Curtis. So you played the collegiate at the time, right? Was
hmm
it
And I
Aquinas?
probably played amateur at the same time. Yeah.
Right. So walk me through. So what was your current situation? So you were in collegiate at the time, right? D4, a collegiate for who?
Aquinas College
Aquinas
is
College.
is where I still am as well.
Yeah, and then I think your coach came to me as well, right? Your coach came to me and he basically said, "We need help." Um,
Yeah, it was like I had been watching your videos for a while, and then I found out about MLA from someone, I don't remember who, and I signed up, and then as soon as I got into it, I was like, I hit my coach up, and I was like, hey, I really want to do this, but also I'm a broke college student. Like, can we work something out where I can get coaching here? Because A, I need it, and B, I don't really have the money for it.
yeah, your college funded or your team funded the fee for the MLA, which
hmm
is great. And so, yeah, I remember you came to me and we started from scratch, didn't we? We spoke about
Yeah.
champ pools. We figured out your laning was abysmal. To
It was awful. I came in and I was like, listen, the type of player I see myself as is that I suck at laning, but then I hit 20 minutes and I'm godlike at the game. And you're like, wait a second, that's not how the game works.
That's right. So we had to go back to scratch, right? And then so that season, we worked together. You went from Diamond Four to Grandmaster, 600 LP, which is amazing, right? That's a huge achievement. Climbing from most people get to Diamond and bottom of Master in 1 year. You went all the way to
Mhm.
600 LP, which is amazing, and that was a really good sign, and obviously a sign into your trajectory. And then 2022 already 716 LP in Challenger. So let's start from. I mean, this was not a smooth journey by any means. People watching this right now are probably thinking, this guy is talented, this guy, this. So, okay, I think step one, we need to talk about your laning. So, what was it? I think you came in with a lot of mental blocks with your laning. Like, you viewed yourself as not a mechanical player. I think that was the first
Yeah.
one. I remember some of the earlier sessions you were saying things like, I just have bad micro. I'm just getting gapped in lane by all these people. You
Yeah.
kept
I,
saying
I have
that.
no, I have no hands,
You're right. You kept,
you
yeah. This
know.
negative self talk was actually a really big problem of you at the beginning, and I think what we did, I think, did you end up doing 1v1s? Was 1v1s part of your early
I did
journey?
for a while, but funnily enough, it actually hasn't been a huge part of my routine
Right.
over the past few months.
Mm.
There definitely was a time period for a while where I was doing 1v1s, and it became discouraging to me because I was getting stomped in 1v1s by
Right.
people that I was, supposed to be better than, quote
Right.
unquote.
Yeah. And how do you remember how we tackled your micro problem? We just got granular, didn't we? We went matchup by matchup, was it not?
We went a lot more matchup by matchup. I watched like a lot of VODs of good players looking for different things. And I think like at the end of the day, like in my opinion, the thing that changed my micro wasn't as much like a hand practice thing as much as like a mental thing of I think I let's see, I'm thinking back. The quote that you told me that has like stuck with me since is I think you said it was something from Fire, which is that like there is no like aggressive defensive like whatever. There's literally just an unoptimal and an optimal way to play it. And so my whole thing was like I'm a collegiate amateur player. I play in competitive play, which means that I'm gonna sit in mid lane and I'm gonna do nothing and handshake farm to 100 CS and then play the game out at 20 minutes or whatever, which is like you saying that completely shifted my understanding of what is possible to actually punish your lane opponent for, and the fact that it's genuinely bad if you're not doing that.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing. Because you came into lanes and I was thinking, why are we giving pressure in this lane? Why are you not killing this guy? Why are we not hitting this guy? And I think it was the biggest thing. We just directed attention towards it. Yeah, I think you're spot on. It wasn't really your lack of hands, as they say. It was
Yeah,
more you were okay with giving pressure, wasn't it? It was more you
yeah,
were okay with quote unquote going even in lane. And when you
yeah,
switch your mentality to, and one of the common things I say in the MLA, just dominating your opponent, I think that really opened a whole, didn't it? It changed
yeah.
everything.
It changes everything because then it not only like is the game fundamentally different in terms of when you can find an advantage and how, but like it also makes it so when you finish a game and you think to like what can I do better for next time, there's a lot more to look at than if I just handshake farm to 20 minutes and then I, look at my mid late game team fighting, and a lot of times that's not going to help you climb or whatever.
Right. I mean,
So
that was the thing I constantly said. Let's get your first 8 minutes sorted first, and then we can look at the mid game. But you at the start saying, yeah, go to this mid game team fight and all this. I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's back it
yeah.
all the way up. We're gonna look at your level 1, your level 2, your pre first base.
Yeah.
Make sure you're hitting your Qs on Syndra or hitting your E's on
Hmm.
Victor. Then we can tackle this later on. Okay, so champ pool. You went through a shit show with your champ pool. I mean, I would wake up one morning say, Curtis, my champ pool sucks. The next day, I'm the best at this. Like, it was a disaster. So, if you were to go back in time, right? Like, knowing what you know now, like, obviously,
Hmm.
you've heard me talk about the same thing for over a year now. What would you tell previous Steve at, start of 2021?
Uh, I I figured it out, around that time, around when I joined MLA because of what you push for Champion Mastery. But the amount of time that I spent in that interim between when I first hit Diamond and when I joined the MLA, wasting time literally asking for, can I pick for someone so that I can get last pick and then I'm going to counter pick the enemy laner every game. It is ridiculous when you look at my OPGG, the amount of champions, unique champions that I was playing in like season 9, season
Yeah.
2020. I was playing like one of my most played champions. I'm looking at it right now. One of my most played champions, my ninth most played champion in season 2020 was Pantheon because I picked Pantheon mid to slam Yasuo's every time that it got picked. I don't know how to play Pantheon a single bit, but I would pick it all the time.
I mean, this is the thing: is that in your head, the narrative was, okay, if I win this one game playing suboptimally with this niche counter pick, it's better than learning the matchup on a somewhat even one of your main champs. That's maybe like an even matchup, but developing champion mastery.
Yeah,
It
because
took
there
you.
was zero dedication to learning. It was all about winning.
It was all about winning short term, and that bit you in the ass. I mean, over the past those few years, didn't it? Because you did that, it only gets you so far, right? Champ, we know you knowing what you know now. The difference between going from bottom of master to chow, a lot of it is champion mastery, isn't it? I'd say a huge part of it is champion mastery.
Can I do something and see your reaction to it? Like this is just the epitome of like how you talk a lot about like finding your identity as a player and finding like what kind of champs you gravitate to. These are my top 10 champs in season 2020. Cassiopeia, Galio, Oriana, Syndra, Twisted Fate, Zoe, Set, Yasuo, Pantheon, Lucian.
It doesn't make sense, does it?
There's literally no
There's
coordination
no,
between
no,
any of those champs.
no. I
It
mean,
just didn't make
you didn't have
sense.
an identity. That's the biggest thing, actually. One of the big things we worked on was like you had no identity. And I said, we're scrapping these assassins, right? We're scrapping the Yasuos and all
Yeah.
that crap. We're not going to play that. Let's just focus first on getting good at your core champs. And I think what we said was eventually what we figured out at the end, because the tricky thing with you, Steve, was that you had to play competitive, right? So
Yeah.
ideally, for the average solo queue player, you would only have 3 or 4 champs in your pool, right? But it was tricky for
Yeah.
you because you need to have a somewhat deep champ pool for drafts, right? So
Because not only like just to kind of elaborate on
mm,
that, not only was I like playing competitive, but I was also almost always the highest ranked player on every team I was playing on, which meant that it was not out of the question for me to get 3 bans in phase 1.
right. Okay. So they were target banning you
So,
as well, right?
yeah.
So that made it even harder. So you weren't just climbing to challenger with the luxury of playing 3 champions. What we ended up figuring out was, okay, we're gonna have one account, right? We did the one account, which was for your core main climbing champs. This is the your babies essentially. Your 3 or 4 champs that you're gonna get most of your OP on, and then we have another account that's for getting a very rudimentary foundational level of understanding on like another 5 champs, wasn't it?
Yeah, like experimental stuff. Like if my coach tells me, this is like a recent example that hasn't happened, but it definitely could, is like
Mm.
if my coach says we need to be contesting Ari in draft, I'm not gonna go on my main and crank out 20 games of Ari, which by the way is exactly what happened in season 2021 with Rise. I went something like 2-17 on my
Mm.
first 19 Rise
Well, there
games
goes
on
your
my
LP.
main. Yeah, there goes my LP. And now I know how to play Rise, but in the short term it didn't work out at all. So now it's like if I need to learn a champ from ground zero, like I need to have another account to do this. And then for my main, I'm restricting that to champions that I don't really have to think about the intricacies of to play.
Well, 100%. But you got to and what we realized is that you're not gonna and I think the tough lesson was you're not gonna be a challenger level player on 7 or 8 champions. You're gonna be a challenger
Yeah.
level player on a handful that are your bread and butter, and the rest of them you just need to be like maybe like a low master or a D1 level, really, because you're picking them
Yeah.
only in good situations. You're never gonna pick them in bad situations, right?
Hmm.
Now, Steve, mental
Oh
blocks.
no. Yeah.
We did many, many, many psychological conversations, right? Talking about your mental. And I would say that emotional regulation was a big problem of yours, where
Hmm.
you kind of knew what you needed to do, but you couldn't bring yourself to do it. So I mean, let's just list out some of the mental blocks that we faced during this journey and we had to tackle. I think a big one was comparing yourself to others,
Hmm.
which is I think a very common one for people climbing to challenger for the first time, right? You're getting into these games, you're versus these challenger people or high elo players, and you're doubting yourself, you're comparing yourself to others. There was your own expectations. Or do you want to go back on it? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I wanted to go back just real
Mm.
quick because like for me, like what I tell all of like my friends and stuff,
Mm.
who like ask about like I all the time when I talk to my friends, they're like, have you ever played with like Tyler One, or like have you ever played with like whatever? And like for me, the most fun and interesting and like eye-opening part about climbing is that it feels like a constant, it's been like a constant process of like I just need one or two good games to realize that this caliber of players is mortal. Because like when I first started playing in GM, I started playing against these players and I would have a game where I just get absolutely demolished and I'm like, I don't deserve to be here. And then over time, I'd get sent back down, get back up to GM, I'd play more games, get sent back down, get back up, and then eventually I'd be like, wait a second, like these players are just you see funnily enough, it's like seeing these players int and run it down like you do is like it's an eye-opening thing where you're like, okay, everyone is collectively like they have good games and they have bad games, and I feel like as soon as I break that mental block, like I'm there, which is what happened the past few days hitting Challenger as well. Is like I got to the border of Challenger and I would just start playing like garbage because I convinced myself that it was an upper echelon of play that I wasn't ready for yet, and I had to go through that process multiple times before I felt I was like mentally ready.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's all about like League is a game where you got to learn how to fail. Everyone is gonna fail, aren't you? You're gonna fail your
Hmm.
promos. You're gonna fail your first climb. You're gonna get knocked back down. You're gonna lose matchups that you know. You're gonna go on loss streaks. Everyone's gonna fail, right? It's how you bounce back from that failure, which actually determines a lot of people that make it and don't. I've had clients that are probably quote unquote more talented than you, in my opinion, would had more probably more of a trajectory than you. The difference is that they couldn't they couldn't play the long game. They couldn't get into the review over and over and over and over again, take those L's, come back, look at the learnings, and move on again. This is something that as well, like you remember my response was basically the same every single time, wasn't it? You said you came to me and said, Curtis, what do I do? And I said, all right, let's look into it, right? Because and this is not just you, but I think a lot of people, their default response is to look at it at a very general higher level. It's like these players are better, or like notice that when you're talking about names as well, this player or these champions or this whatever it might be, you're so far away from the details of what actually happened in that game. It's never gonna get you anywhere. Sorry, you were gonna say
Yeah,
something?
I mean, the most specific example that I can think of is when I came to you after my worst amateur series of all time, and I said, Curtis, I just went 1-19 versus a challenger mid laner across 2 games, and I feel like he destroyed me on every aspect of the game. Like, I think he might just be better. I don't know if I can actually keep up with these people.
Yeah.
And then we did like an impromptu session Like you just
Yep.
popped into a call.
Emergency
It was like late
session.
at night. Yeah, emergency session, and we just watched it. And then the first 3 levels, you were like, "Well,
It's
you're
end of
just
review.
standing within LeBlanc's W range as Syndra and not spacing your Qs." And I was like, "Wait a second,
Yeah.
you're right. Like I wasn't even playing the game."
You weren't even, yeah, you weren't not hitting your cues. That's it. It's just
Yeah,
simple.
I wasn't playing. I wasn't tethering. I wasn't hitting my Qs. Like as soon as we saw I mean, you say details all the time, but like as soon as we saw the actual specific examples of what I can improve on next time, it's like, okay, maybe this guy isn't just like there is no, I guess it feels very refreshing to have reached a point where my knowledge about the game is to a point where I can watch a VOD of Faker and Showmaker, and it's not like these are some like incredible beings. They are just making high quality decisions consistently. And I understand the reasoning behind the decisions that they're making. It's just that I'm not making the same quality of decisions as consistently right now. And that's the only thing that separates me. It's not because they have some insane ability in their hands, or it's not that they have knowledge that I can't gain. It's literally just consistency and getting the reps.
It's all consistency, right? And
Yeah.
that's the amazing thing when you get to a certain rank, right? Where you get to when you start to have master of your champion, you kind of know, and your mental stack kind of expands, and you kind of see the game more cerebrally, more open from like a wider lens. You look at like Chovy, and you actually respect players like Chovy and Showmaker more, don't you?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
like you respect them more, right? Because they're just doing the basics really, really, really well. Like they're not missing CS. They're perfectly tethering. They're landing the abilities when they need to land them. They're not rushing their abilities. They're jungle tracking. They're warding. They're just doing all the basics, aren't they? That's all it
Yeah,
is.
you respect them more because they don't. You realize that they don't have access to anything that you don't. They're just doing these things that you already are capable of doing perfectly
Every
every
single
time.
time. Yeah, every
Yeah.
single time. Yeah. Um. So tying back, how did you? So was it more you learnt how to fail essentially? It's not that you ever. It's not that you ever didn't feel. It's not that you ever stopped comparing yourself to others. It was more you knew how to overcome that through failure in a way. So it's like, was it more like that, or do you feel as though you incrementally compared yourself less to others over time?
Um, I mean, like if we're being honest, anybody who's watching this who has been in MLA for a while has probably witnessed one of my many mental breakdowns in literally the general chat. Like it's not pretty.
Mm.
Like my I feel like I'm still not where I need to be completely with my mental, but like at the end of the day what happened was that I had like a heart to heart conversation with my coach like 2 weeks ago, uh with like my collegiate coach, and he's someone who has dealt with a lot of the same like
Mm.
mental like fear of failure stuff like that. And like I just kind of have to keep repeating to myself that like the idea of failure and the idea of mistakes is a lot more comforting than failing and not knowing why it happened at all.
Mm.
Like if you go in a VOD and you can see like this is what I did wrong, that is a million times better and easier on my mental than if I play a game and like we were talking about with that 1 in 19 and I just feel like I don't know what happened. And so as soon as I started like looking for those mistakes as like a good thing, like it's inherently good when you make a mistake and when you have now an opportunity for essentially the rest of your career to never make that mistake again because you've weeded it out and you've analyzed it and whatnot. That becomes like a way more like long term like satisfying thing to work at because it feels like you can slowly I love the analogy of the sculpture, to be honest. Like
Mm.
I think it's your best analogy, to be honest, where you just start slowly chipping away at it. And once you chip away at one of those areas, you never like a lot of times you
It's there.
never
It's
have to
done
go back
a lot
there.
of the time.
It's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, I
And
love
so
that
there's a certain
analogy.
fulfillment.
For those of people who are listening who don't know this analogy, essentially, I envision a starting league player as like literally a block of stone, like a block of marble. And at the start, when you're in gold, you're kind of just getting the basic shape of like a sculpture, right? You're just chipping away the edges, and you can kind of see what it is. It's like some person or something. And then every rank, you're getting a little bit more detailed and getting into a little bit more detail. And by the time you're in Master Plus, it's all refinement. You're just smoothing the edges, smoothing it a little
Yeah.
bit here, smoothing it a little bit there, chipping away there. Just very small. You might of an entire 3 block, you might learn one thing, right? Like you like, oh, okay, this matchup I need to take E level 2 instead of level 3 or something. It's just like, that's it.
Yeah, in this matchup, I need to go D ring instead of C pot, and that's your learning.
That's
for the
your
session.
learning.
But then you run into that matchup again, and you do something different, and that's where the fulfillment and the satisfaction
Yeah.
comes from. It's not from the wins; it's from that constant process of
I
learning.
think that one thing you did get better at over time through the sessions is that you understood that it was okay to just end the review at like 3 minutes. Like, it's okay. Like, you're not gonna get
Yeah.
you're not gonna like go like 25 minutes into the game and look at every single detail. There's probably 2 or 3 pivotal things that happened. They could be in the first 10 minutes, first 3 minutes really, and then that's it. Walk away, move on. Let's go to the next one.
For me, it's about like the way that I have categorized my experience is that it's about like the units of measurement that I view the game in. So like I have this like personal like mental theory that's basically like the lower down you are, the larger the units of the game are. So like
Mm,
when you are bronze or iron, you probably see the game in just wins and losses. That is the unit. And then you get a little bit higher up and you start to see the game in, kills and deaths. And then you get a little bit higher up and you start to see those CS advantages that build up. And then you get even farther up and it doesn't even have to be CS advantages. It can be like playing for prio and then finding a roam and invading with your jungler and all these things. You can play for these tiny little incremental advantages. And it's almost like I feel like the smaller the units of the game that you see, the more control you have. And as someone like me, I focus a lot on like the control that I have over my personal experiences. That's why I find it so frustrating when I fail and people are like, sometimes you're just going to play bad. Like, I hate that. I hate the sometimes you're just going to play bad and you have to deal with it. So I try to control as many things as possible. And I feel like the smaller the units that I can see the game in, like the more control I have over
mm.
the individual things that happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But that, do you think that that came for you incrementally as you just studied the game more, right? And climb
Yeah,
more?
I think it came from like again like zooming in and focus details because then you start seeing those tinier
Right.
areas, right? You don't just look at a death and you're like you start looking at a death and you start looking 30 seconds before the death because you realize, well, I didn't die here because I mechanically misplayed it. I died here because I had no resources because I used too much mana on the way because I was pushing. And why was I pushing? And then you start asking all those
And
questions
then
and
you
you
and
start
then you realize that
yeah.
your approach to the lane overall was wrong. Your reference point was
Yeah.
wrong from the get go. Yeah, yeah, that's actually a really good point because I just want to make a video about this later on, talking about how I think you're spot on. People struggle with zooming out and zooming in. For example,
Mhm.
the the 3 miscues in lane as Syndra is equally important to actually knowing that your reference point is wrong in the first place, isn't it?
Yeah.
But they're completely different concepts. You got one that's your overall approach, the way you're viewing your champion in this matchup, and like your mindset, and then one is the small minor details. But both are equally important. You know, one can't compensate for the other, and or at least to
Yeah.
the level that you were talking about, to like challenger level, you need to have both, right?
hmm And I think like another like the other concept that is always living in the back of my mind is that I love that visualization of like the bars that go up and down where when you try to raise one bar, the other ones
The other
naturally
one,
drop. And it's kind of this constant juggling act of like, if I want to improve on one thing, I'm going to get worse at other things. And you just kind of have to run around in like this wild goose chase, addressing different areas of your gameplay and accepting that other ones are going to
yeah.
get bad while you're not focusing
No,
on
that's a
them.
really
And
really
it's very
important one.
frustrating.
Well, I think the frustration only comes from not knowing how that concept works,
Yeah, because
right?
if you don't know about it, then you're just like, I'm regressing, I'm getting worse.
That's what you
But
used to
once
say,
you realize
right?
that yeah, once you realize that that's a completely natural part of the process because you're focusing on other things and then it'll come back with time, then it becomes a lot more guaranteed and a lot more,
And people,
again, like yeah.
yeah, for the people who don't get that, basically all that works is you improve at one thing, right? You improve at one thing. Let's say this is um, jungle
Micro.
tracking. I said jungle tracking, right? Something very specific, right? Tracking first clear. So that you get that up. Let's say that's out of 100. You get that up to like an 85, and then you work that as much of a habit as possible. You shift your focus to another learning objective, whatever it might be. Naturally, that's not going to stay at 85. That might bump down to 80 or 75. But it's still higher than what it was. It started at like 60. So it's still up net 15%, but it's not where it used to be. Now, if you go into that
Mhm.
other game and you make that mistake that you wouldn't have made because you were doing that jungle tracking, you're probably thinking, what was the whole point of me working on that learning objective? But no, but in the grand scheme of your games, right, you're gonna be better at that skill. And then you just gotta go over and over and over again. It's just an incremental process. Moving
Yeah.
on from this though, I think What was some of the ways you dealt with climbing through the ranks? So I know a lot of people. Do you remember the first time you climbed from diamond to master? Was there a big mental block there for you or not?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the first time, I mean, I think I had to do promos from Diamond into Master and then immediately fell out. Like, I'm talking like I get into Master, I lose 2 games, I'm back in
Yeah,
Diamond.
yep, yep.
I think it was 7 times before I could actually stay in Master for longer than a week. And literally every single time I was like, well, I don't really deserve to be here, but I'm going to try to stay in here for as long as possible. And I had players that were like, this was when like Seraphine had just come out and I was playing a lot of Seraphine mid and I had like a high elo streamer be like, don't worry, once Seraphine gets nerfed, like you're going back where you belong. And that just like reinforced everything that I thought about myself. So like
Oh
for me,
no.
like every time I would hit a new rank, I would be like, I do not deserve this. I do not belong here, but I'm just going to try my best and see if I can
Uh,
learn as much from these players as I can before I inevitably plummet back down.
oh no. So what would you, knowing what you know now, what would you say about that? How would you handle that situation differently?
Like I don't even know because it's hard. Like it's almost the type of thing where I feel like that has to happen to you for
Mm,
you to understand. Like again, the biggest thing for me has been like when I see players of these elos performing in the same kind of bad games that I like like beat myself up for, then it almost like mortal. It makes those players mortal, and it doesn't put them so much
right.
farther above me. So I almost feel like it's kind of like a trial and error thing, at least for me personally. I don't know if there's some sort
Yeah.
of mental trick that you can do to get around it, but for me, I literally have to see myself performing well
Mm,
alongside these players and these players performing poorly alongside me because then that puts us on even playing field
mm.
and I feel like I can keep moving up.
Yeah, I'll be honest. That's actually one part back then when you were going through that master thing. I think that's actually one thing that I didn't know how to coach properly. Like I think I have an idea now. Essentially, like the way I approach it now is a lot of people struggle because they're thinking about master tier 0 LP, and they're thinking about attaching like their skill to a number. But if you
Yeah,
actually shift your narrative to I just want to play beautiful League of Legends, like let's see where this gets me. Like if this gets me to 50 LP master or 200 or 400, it doesn't matter. Like I know that this is suboptimal. This is optimal. If I do all the things that are optimal, let's just see where that gets me. But what people get so
yeah,
tunneled in, I just need to scrape the bottom of the barrel to get to master. Same thing for people getting D4 for the same time, right? I just need to just get to D4. Your mentality should be, if I play like this, I'm not going to stay here anyway. I got to play beautiful League of Legends. If I play beautiful League of Legends, and if you don't know what beautiful League of Legends looks like, that's the first problem,
yeah,
right? I think that's how I would handle it now. It's tying it back to the actual gameplay itself. Screw where
yeah.
you're at, whether you're a D1, Master, 200 LP, D2, doesn't matter. It's this is correct, this is incorrect. Let's focus on the things that are incorrect and replicate the things that are correct. See where it gets you.
Yeah. I think like detaching from the result is simultaneously the single most difficult thing to do for like almost any league player, but also one of the most important. Like, I mean, anyone who's been watching General for the past 2 days knows that I haven't mastered that yet. I was driving myself nuts 2 nights ago because I was like, I'm so close to Challenger. I just need to hit it. Like, I just
Oh
need to
no.
get right over this hump. And that was 2 days ago. Like, it's
Oh
not like
no.
I'm suddenly so much better at that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like the reality is that it's something that's extremely hard to do to
It
detach yourself
is. It
from the
is.
result. And as soon as I came back the next day with the mindset after talking to my coach of, I'm just gonna play for the long term. I'm gonna play with to help my team, and I'm gonna focus on being the best player I can be in order to provide for my team. As soon as that happened, I came into the next day, didn't worry as much about results, and then I played
That's beautiful.
exceptional the last
What a
day.
great coach. You have a really great coach there in your team.
I have two
Um,
of them, you
that's
and him.
that's awesome. Yeah, yeah, me and him. Yeah. Um, what I will say here. So learning objective wise, walk me through if you can remember some of the most impactful areas of the game that you honed in on that probably got you the most immediate results or things that really changed the way you play the game.
Number one is intention. Our first few reviews were literally just you looking at my VODs and asking me about why I did something and me being like, I don't know. And then you like challenged me to basically because I was and I imagine that there are other players who fall under this category of just an auto pusher. I would play
Yep.
mages and my wave control strategy on every single wave was I'm going to push. I'm going to immediate laser the wave on Victor. I'm going to cue the wave as Syndra. I'm going to
Yeah.
expend all my mana, and I'm going to get pushed because in competitive play, that's something that I was rewarded for because priority is really important. But when you have no idea what you want to do with that priority, it's actually just inherently bad.
Yep. You're not getting anywhere.
So as soon as you challenge me, like literally just I don't care if what you're doing is wrong, but as long as you have a reason for it, then we can attack that reasoning
Right.
and correct it. And then, at the end of the day, I will be doing correct things because I'll be thinking about them and
Mm.
I'll know the reasons why I'm doing them. And I think that's a lot
Yeah.
of what has like caused my gameplay to shift.
So do you think that that was because you were an old school player? You played since season 2 or something, right?
I'd since literally season 1, yeah.
Right.
Like it's like ingrained into my veins because I played since I was like 8.
Right. So I think that you're a particular breed of player where like these old school intuitive players that just played a lot. Like you were a grinder, right? Like you
Yeah,
grinded for years and years and years. You developed such like an order, not an. I would say it's semi autopilot, but you just thought that was genuinely the way to go. Like you didn't question why you did certain things. And yeah, I think
yeah.
our first like few months really, we're just like, why are we doing this? Let's just ask
Because
it.
I
What?
mean the reality is that like when I started playing the game, people didn't really have reasons for the
No,
things they did. The people who dominated were people who had
better
the
micro.
intuition, and I was stuck in Bronze 5, and we didn't, we didn't know anything. I mean, I was playing on my mom's Windows XP computer on like 70 ping. Like I had no clue what was going on. I was like
Yeah,
an 8-year-old.
yeah,
So I built so many bad habits from just
yeah.
having absolutely no clue what was
Hundred
going on in
percent.
the game. And then when I came back and people actually had a fundamental understanding of the game and how it worked, because I took a break for like 3 years. And then when I came back in season 7, I was like, wait a second, like people actually have reasons for why they're doing what they're doing
Right.
now.
Yeah.
And that was completely unfamiliar to me.
Fascinating. And then um, what are some other learning objectives that we worked on outside of the intention? If you can remember, if you can't remember, that's okay.
Um, I think that I mean jungle tracking is something that I was very bad at. Especially I would get caught out by supports all the
Mm.
time on support roams.
Support roam tracking.
Um, and like nowadays, like I mean, there's that quote from like the Dopa AMA where he's like Faker is the best because he gets the jungler to his lane and then never dies to the jungler. And I've been thinking about that a lot recently. Of like, I've effectively gotten to a point where I have a good idea of what the jungler's first clear is going to be, and I don't feel like I have to be scared levels 1 through 3, and then I get my ward, and I'm usually fine. I almost never die to the support and stuff like that. That was something that was losing a lot of my games, and that was especially frustrating because I felt like I was outlaning the other mid laner objectively, and then I would just go like 0-5 because of jungle pressure or whatever.
Right. Fascinating. And that's a really big one, isn't it? It's like the importance of simply not dying.
Hmm.
You know, how weird is that? Like, you'd think like at master tier. This is the other. You'd think at like master GM that your learning objectives or your focus would be some advanced, really advanced thing. But a lot of the time, it's really basics. It's gone back to basics. Like I know my
Yeah.
matchup. Now I just got to do it while not dying, while
Hmm.
exerting the most pressure as possible, and then tracking where everyone is. Just expanding your mental stack.
And the third learning objective, by the way, is like resets. Easily, I think
Yeah,
resets is the most important part about League of Legends. If I'm being honest,
your
when
resets were
I
abysmal,
like
Steve.
I do coaching like myself as well on the
Yeah.
side, and the number one thing that I've been seeing is like people just do not know
Oh
when,
no.
how, or why to reset.
They don't, I think that's actually okay because you've been on both sides of this because I roasted you for months on this
Yes, absolutely.
right on resets, but in my mind it's like okay a reset leads to control later on, doesn't it? A lot of the time, a good
Mhm,
reset leads to lane control. It leads to prior. It leads to all this stuff, right? In your
mhm.
mind, what was breaking down? Was it the fact that you didn't think far enough ahead, or was it more you didn't realize you were overstaying, or you weren't getting into the details and realizing, okay, here I'm in lane with no way out, and you just kind of accepted that was the reality? Like, where do you think it came from?
It's such a buzzword, so I hate to use it. Like it's number one, like amateur League of Legends, like, master tier player buzzword. But like I think until I had an understanding of what tempo is,
Right.
I could not fundamentally understand why or when to reset.
Okay.
Just this idea that you can be resetting with the intention that I'm going to come back with more resources and more items, which means that sometime down the line, if they did not reset at the same time as me, they're going to reset, and that leaves a window now for me to do something.
Mm,
And kind of seeing the game as that push and pull instead of like such an isolated lane matchup, I think when you see the whole map, it becomes a lot easier to holistically figure out when and why to reset.
fascinating. Yeah, it's a really good point. You kind of take it for granted once you understand that concept, don't you? Like you gotta
Yeah,
just do
because
it
it's not something
intuitively.
that's easy to understand.
No, it's not. Yeah. Well, it's like once you get it, you get it. It's like I can't imagine playing League without understanding that. But yeah, you got to
Mhm.
sometimes be really empathic and like understand that. Wow, if I didn't understand this concept, my entire perception of the game would differ. It's definitely
Yeah.
fascinating. So to wrap this up, Steve, I want to ask you a few quick questions. Number one, what advice would you give to the average Diamond player striving to get to Challenger?
Literally just focus hard on champion mastery. To find out which type of learner you are, because for me, I'm someone who watches a ton of VODs of the best players of the champions that I play. I watch a lot of VODs since I'm a competitive player. I almost find it more reasonable to watch VODs of people like Showmaker and Faker who are expected to play like 8 champions consistently and viably and at a high level because that seems more realistic to where I am. And so I get a lot of value out of watching VODs like that. Like I can watch things and then bring that into my head for the next game. But some people are just like you, they just have to put the reps in, grind the games and
Do
feel
yeah.
it out and stuff like that. And I think finding out which type of learner you are is like number one.
Okay. And if you were to go back in time knowing what you know now, what are some things that maybe you would have done differently? Or what would you have told Steve from 2 years ago? Right now, if Steve from 2 years ago was in your room, g'day Steve, what would you say?
I mean, the funny part is that this isn't even like just a League of Legends thing because I think you've talked a lot about on BBC and stuff like that about how League of Legends can be like a genuine vehicle for you to discover a lot about yourself and learn some important things that help you in the real world and beyond, right? And I think for me, like I never knew how to fail. Just realistically, I had no clue how to fail. It didn't matter if it was a loss streak in League or failing a test or losing a friend over something wrong that I did. Like no matter what, I would break down when I failed. And it wasn't any of those other things. I haven't been failing on tests, and that's not why I've learned how to fail. It wasn't, you know, I failed enough times in my friendships and relationships to learn how to fail. It's literally just I have learned how to fail through League of Legends. And so I think opening up my mind to that idea of seeing failure as an opportunity and seeing mistakes as kind of like an indicator to what you're doing wrong is like the biggest and most important thing that I've learned from my life in literally all aspects, not even just League.
Well, that's amazing, dude. I really, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. And I think that's probably that's why I'm so passionate about coaching league. It really is a vehicle to develop a growth mindset.
Hmm.
Learning how to fail is probably one of the most important skills of the 21st century. Is it, it literally is. We're living in such a fast paced world. You got to learn how to fail, whether it's,
Hmm.
yeah, like you said, fail. You fail at work, you fail at school, you fail in a relationship, or whatever it might be. You got to learn how to look at that. It's like my favorite quote from Ray Dalio is that pain plus reflection equals progress. That's all it is, really, and learning how to master that. But it's so much easier said than done, isn't it? Because the pain, like of that painful experience, losing that, having that through that 0-3 block, or that losing that promos, or not reaching that that goal that season that you want, it can be brutal.
And it's way easier to just stop right
Give
there
up
than to keep going
or
through it.
protect your ego and give up
Yeah.
and blame externals and then
And I
be
and I
bitter.
think it's so beautiful. And I think it's so beautiful that we have a game that is not only fun, but it's a safe environment for people like me to figure those lessons out, where I don't have to experience really real life consequences for not knowing how to fail and stuff like that. It's completely created an area for me to figure things out in a safe and, you know, albeit a little bit toxic, but relatively consequenceless environment.
Well, I mean, thank you so much, Steve, for sharing. Um, beautiful. Any final shout outs, thoughts, things that you wanted to get off your chest?
Ah, when I hear shout outs, the only thing I can think of is that, I know a lot of people don't have the benefit of having super supportive parents. I know a lot of parents look down on like gaming and stuff like that. For me, I've had incredibly supportive parents, and that has been like the number one driving force of what's let me get to the point that I am. So, you know, I know nobody in the MLA knows them directly, but I still feel the need to
Shout out
shout them out
Steve's
'cause they're great.
parents. That's great. So awesome. Well, awesome. Thanks for the interview, Steve. Thanks for taking the time, and no stopping here. Right now, we're going to maintain Charles and get higher
Yeah,
than where you're at. So
rank one win.
rank one. All right, awesome. Well, thanks for stopping by and chat soon. Okay.
All right, see ya.
Cheers.